Hayovel is a non-profit organization that brings Christians from all over the world to help the small independent farmers in Judea and Samaria.
The world calls it the West Bank, but in reality, it is the biblical heartland of Israel.
People are coming from nations in almost every continent to harvest grapes and olives, to plant and prune vineyards, and so much more.
What drives us is our vision to see the restoration of God's kingdom back to Israel. We believe this is integrally connected to the agriculture blossoming and blooming on the mountains of Israel.
After they have come, seen, and touched the places where 85% of the Bible took place, volunteers then become effective ambassadors to the nations.
When not in Israel, Hayovel's mission is to spread the truth to the world about what is really happening in the heartland of Israel.
We do this through media, speaking tours, conferences, and grassroots advocacy.
Whatever we are doing, our goal is to build up and to strengthen the land and the people of Israel.
The mountains of Israel,
where prophecy meets reality.
Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. Jerusalem, the most hotly contested real estate in the world. Judea and Samaria, condemned by the world as the West Bank. You'll not see it in the media. Journalists try to hide it. Real stories about real people, fathers, mothers, children, families. These are the people of the heartland of Israel. Your journey with them continues with the Joshua and Caleb Report. Stories from the heartland of Israel.
Jeremy Gimpel, it is awesome to sit here in your home. I can tell you the view from his balcony is something that I think people would pay millions for. And back home, and you know, we have the Smoky Mountains near us in Tennessee, but this is absolutely, if I can use the word epic and not sound too, I don't know what's up there. Anywho, I want to go back to your story here because what is fascinating about you is your journey from where God has brought you and the steps that He's taken you now to be a show host, voice of Israel, blasting it to the nations. But let's go back because I think the most important thing that we want to capture from you right now is your story. But let's go back to your dad because it's a fascinating story. I heard you telling it to our group about a month or two ago. Was just hearing the story about your dad. Somehow or another, I guess he got to Israel first and then he took a boat to America. And then he got there and didn't have any money hardly and just said, okay, the cheapest college. And I remember you finished the details for me. Go ahead and tell us.
So the way it began was really my grandfather walked from Russia to Israel when he was 15 years old in 1916. And he spent the first few years of his life draining the swamps of the north. And now, you see the northern part of Israel. It's like the most beautiful place in Israel. And my father was born in Jerusalem, finished his high school, went to the IDF, served in the army for 3 years. And then his plan was to become a doctor. But the only medical school, there was only one, was packed. And he didn't have the grades, too busy playing soccer. And he got on the last boat to leave Israel, ended up in New York. And he had $500 in his pocket. And he said, well, I better find the cheapest college in America because I don't have any money. And he found that the cheapest college in America was a Baptist Bible college outside Alexandria, Louisiana. And he got on a bus, ended up in a Baptist Bible college. And for a Jew to get on a boat from the land of Israel and end up in a Baptist Bible college outside Alexandria, Louisiana in 1960 was totally unheard of. But the Christians there loved my dad. And they helped him, they supported him, and they said, a Jew has come from the Holy Land to come and bless our institution. And they saw it as a blessing. And my dad, worked and worked and worked, and it's just like a workhorse. The guy didn't know English. And it's not easy to get into medical school in America either. And he was putting in, 20-hour days sometimes. And one Saturday night, they invited him out to a football game. And my dad said, football, I love football. I've played football my whole life. The reason why I'm here in Louisiana is because I was so busy playing football. Because in Hebrew, of course, kaduregel is football translated, but really that's soccer. And so he went to the football stadium expecting to see a soccer game, and what he sees is these, big husky Americans killing each other on the field. And my dad's like, well, what did America do to soccer? And, he pays close attention to the game, and they saw at one point they kicked this egg-shaped ball through this big H. And my dad said, well, what is that? I could do that. He said, what are you talking about? I said, listen, I've been playing my football my whole life. I can kick that little egg through that big H. And he said, well, could you show us? And he said, well, sure. So they put the ball on the 20-yard line. And if you look at old football clips, they used to kick the ball straight on with like sawed off toes. And my dad, stood at an angle and swung at it like a soccer ball like they do today. And the ball went right through. And they were shocked. And ultimately the whole long story happened, but my father was one of the first people to introduce European soccer style kicking to American football. He got a full football scholarship to Oklahoma University Medical School. Somehow he became a doctor and then got an internship in Atlanta. And then of course I was born in Atlanta.
Wow.
But the plan was, become a doctor, get your license, move back to Israel and heal the sick. But life in Atlanta was marvelous for my family. We had a beautiful house and a wonderful car, and then my dad got a raise in his salary, and then he got a nicer car, and then he got another house, and then life just drew us in. And 20 years my family lived in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was in '91 when Saddam Hussein started dropping Scud missiles on Israel that my two older brothers, Daniel and Micah, were in York University, dropped out of school and moved to Israel. Wow. And my parents were like, literally as Scud missiles were landing, my brother's plane landed. And after the war sort of calmed down that summer, I was 11 years old at the time in 1991. My parents said, well, our vision was to finally move back to Israel. Here, our two oldest are already there. Maybe it's time that we make it home. And so at 11 years old, we left Atlanta and we've been in Israel ever since. But the reason why I tell that story, and it's important to note, my grandfather started off his journey to Israel as a secular Zionist. He came from an Orthodox Torah observant home, and he became a secular Zionist, hard to keep kosher as you walk for a year and a half trying to get to Israel. And he was so young, he just didn't have the wherewithal to stay true to the Torah's command. And really he was running away from Russia, running away from anti-Semitism, running away from what would be the Holocaust just a few years later. But my family that came back in 1991, by that time, we weren't secular Zionists, we were religious Zionists. And we weren't running away from Atlanta, we were running to Israel. And those two movements, those two returns to Israel, are almost exact opposites. And that now is the movement of Israel today. It's not a movement out of fear, it's a movement out of courage. And it's not a secular movement, but it's very much a religious, spiritual movement.
That's amazing. The religious spiritual movement is what really, everybody we talk to, it's like this huge, major connection. It's a faith connection to Israel, and that's what it's amazing to see it's exactly what brought your family back to Israel, was that faith that brought you directly. And where did you move to when you came back? I think that's a very...
Yeah, we moved directly to Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. See, I knew it.
And I went to middle school, high school, and I served in the army. And when you talk about the religious connection to Israel, for 2,000 years, religion for us was very personal. It was between our own connection to God, our own observance of commandments, and our own prayers. In 1948, religion changed, and it brought us back to the national redemption. That there is a destiny that's unfolding here in the land of Israel. It's not just about my own personal redemption or my own salvation, but God's plan for humanity is unfolding in Israel. And the question that everyone is challenged with today is, if God's plan is unfolding in Jerusalem, what is my place in God's plan? How can I play the biggest part? How can I be the best character in this story that's unfolding? And so the words of the prophets of Israel that we held on to for thousands of years with just faith. In my grandfather's time, there was no Israel. In 1914, there were 60,000 Jews that lived in Israel. In 2014, there are over 6 million. In just 100 years, to go from 60,000 to 6 million is unprecedented growth. An explosion of holiness is now being revealed in the land of Israel. God's plan is unfolding, meaning the train has left the station. Nothing is going to stop this. And so now the question everyone has is, how can they be a part of it?
Wow. How does it make you feel to be a part of this huge restoration? You got here when you're 8 years old. Pretty much your whole life has been just wrapped up in this huge restoration that's happening.
It's like a whirlwind, because it seems as though the world is coming to a place now where Israel is going to have to take leadership over the world. We're going to have to lead the way as America's sort of losing its place. It's taken God out of the schools. It's taken the Ten Commandments out of the courthouse. It's removing God from every sphere of public life. But society can't live without religion. Society can't live just as animals amongst other animals. It is the God within us that makes us human. Everything around us, all the animals are living beings. We're human beings. We were created in the image of God. Once we take the image of God out of us, then society will fall apart. And so we have now on one hand America, which is removing God from everywhere that it possibly can. And on the other hand, we have ISIS, which is using their God to wage war. And so there needs to be one pillar of leadership, one light in the world that shows, no, the ways of God are ways of peace. The ways of God are the way of love. And Israel is becoming every single year more and more spiritual. And that too is a prophecy in Ezekiel. It says that the Jews that come back, they'll need a new heart. They'll have a heart of stone, will be replaced with a heart of flesh. God will pour his Spirit out upon the people of Israel in order that they will walk in his ways and follow his commandments. Meaning in Ezekiel's vision, first the people that come back will be secular, kind of like my grandfather. But as the generations pass, God's Spirit will move them to reconnect to who they really are. And every single year you can see in Israel a spiritual awakening that's happening. So it's sort of like I'm not just watching this story unfold, but I'm sort of a player in the story, helping mold it and shape it and raising my family here. Growing up in Atlanta, English was my mother tongue. And to see an ancient language that was lost for 3,000 years, my children now speak that holy tongue as their mother tongue. It's like a miracle in the making.
That's amazing. Jeremy, can you tell us about your military days?
Sure. Well, I finished high school. I was 18 years old. And I didn't want to just go into the military directly after high school. So I spent 2 years in a yeshiva, in a seminary, where we studied Jewish philosophy, Torah, the Bible, Jewish law, really focused for 2 years entirely in the spiritual. Because I wanted to go into the Army as a leader, as a light. And I wanted to become an officer. And so I was lucky enough that after 9 months I was promoted to be a class commander, and then from there I was sent off to officers training class. And we served in the Givati Brigade Infantry. And I went into the Army in August of 2000. September of 2000, the Intifada broke out. And so my entire service was in the Gaza Strip, and it was, jarring, because we used to see tires burning, Molotov cocktails being thrown on CNN, and now they're throwing it at me. And now I'm like a player in this new game of being a Jewish soldier. And it dawned on me that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, is the first Jewish army organized, sovereign in the land of Israel since the times of King David. We have resurrected David's army, and we're now fighting the forces of evil. Literally. I know people they don't feel comfortable saying that, but when you see what the neighbors around us are doing to each other, they're turning churches in Syria and Iraq into torture chambers. It's hard for us to imagine, but Christians are being crucified in Syria now. And here there is this one country that accepts people, that's vision is to create a house of prayer for all nations to worship God. And we're battling for freedom. We're battling for the only free society in the Middle East.
I think it's incredible. You're not only a soldier on the front lines of advocacy in Israel, but you're also that physical soldier that's fighting the lines. You were just in Gaza. You were just fighting, and I just think that's an amazing thing. There's not too many people in the world that have both fronts, and you're standing on both of those. That advocacy front, and that's really what I want to talk about now. You're fighting on that war front, but then you've got this other battle going on that you have engaged in a real strong way. Can you talk about what you're doing now in your life of advocacy and moving forward in that direction?
Sure. The last war in Gaza was overwhelming spiritually for me personally. I was, called up into the army. I had 8 hours to arrive at the emergency pickup spot. Thousands of rockets were raining on Israel, and we were called up to defend the innocent civilians of Israel. And at the time when I was watching the news, I was injured in that war. And once I was discharged, I was watching the news coverage. And on one hand, they would have an Israeli spokesman, and then on the other hand, they would have a Hamas spokesman. And I said, has America, the BBC, CNN, have they lost their mind? How could it be? Imagine if after 9/11 they went to the President of the United States, and then on the other side they wanted to talk to Osama bin Laden to hear his side of the story of 9/11. There's no side to his story. We were being shot with rockets. We're defending ourselves. Where has the world gone wrong? And so now we've established Voice of Israel, which is a news broadcasting network from Jerusalem to tell the story as it really is happening from our perspective. That those that really want to hear the true story of Israel, there's an address now, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's to bring the truth out of Israel to the world. You know, there's a prophecy in the 2nd chapter of Isaiah and the 4th chapter of Micah that says, the Torah shall go forth from Zion and the word of God from Jerusalem. You always wonder, well, how is that ever going to happen? Is someone going to have a really loud voice? And just as the Jews returned to the land of Israel, the internet was brought to the world. And now from Jerusalem, the Torah can go forth from Zion and the truth from Jerusalem. And so that's the vision that we have, is, you know, we're surrounded by tyranny and oppression. And that tyranny and oppression isn't satisfied with its own. It wants to take over Europe, and it will ultimately make its way to America. And so there needs to be a voice waking the world up. And so I think that's what Voice of Israel is, and that's our ultimate job.
How long have you been doing stuff like this? Like, you've been involved for a number of years.
Goodness, well, the first radio show we hosted was about over 10 years ago. That evolved into a television show called Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem, and now Voice of Israel has been established. So we've been involved in spreading the truth about Israel for well over 10 years now. And this is our chance. This is our chance. A lot of Jews in the time of the early Zionist movement, they said, well, what would we do if we go to Israel? In the 1900s, Israel was a backwatered, swamp-infested desert away from the world. We're meant to be a light unto the nations. How, if we all move to Israel, into the middle of the Middle East, how will we affect America? How will we affect Europe? How will we do our mission? Little did they know that it's specifically from Israel, being a light as a society, how we deal with the Hamas, how we deal with this threat of terror, how we are living as a democratic society that's continually growing in our spirituality. We are a light to the world, and the whole world now, through the power of telecommunications, television, and the internet, have the chance to see the light from Zion.
Jeremy, there's so many fronts you're on. I'm just sitting here thinking, like, we could go so many directions. But you were involved in so many different things throughout your life, and really right in the present. Last elections, you ran for Knesset.
Yes.
What was that experience?
The experience was phenomenal. It really was. It was awesome. We were traveling around Israel. You know, in Israel, our faith is so interconnected. It's so holistic. You know, for a Jew living in America, you know, he's an American, he's a Yankees fan, he likes going shopping, and he's also a Jew. In Israel, your Judaism is expressed in everything around you. The place that you live is expressed by your faith. The party that you vote for is expressed by your faith. So running around Israel, spreading the ideology that we believe in as religious Zionists, and sort of reminding people that we've made Aliyah, we've ascended to Israel, but now we have to keep on making Aliyah. We have to continue this ascent towards the final goal. The establishment of the State of Israel is the very beginning of the process. And now the goal is Litaken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to establish a kingdom of God in the land of Israel. What that would look like, a kingdom of peace, of harmony, of godliness in the world.
That's awesome. We've talked a lot about all the things you've done and what you're involved in now. I want to hear, like, on a real basic level, back to the family. What is your family like? How many children do you have?
So it's interesting, I live in sort of two worlds, where on one hand, my mind is consumed with God, Israel, the destiny of the Jewish people, biblical destiny unfolding, the nations of the world that are standing against us, those that are standing with us, prophecy unraveling. And so that's like very big vision. And then the rest of my life is very, very little vision. It's entirely focused on my children. The stories of the Bible, you know, we said, well, it's a law, the Torah. It's the laws of how to walk in God's ways. The same way that there are physical laws of gravity, there are spiritual laws of how God wants us to live, to respect our parents, to get married, to build a home, to sanctify certain times. Ultimately, those laws were given to us through stories. And all those stories are stories of families. Adam and Eve, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their children, and their wives, and their families. All of the stories of Israel were given through us through the prism of family. So it's important that we live with very large visions of the destiny that's unfolding in Israel. It all will ultimately boil back to raising really solid families. Loving your wife and making sure she loves you, and raising up the next generation of Israelites in the land of Israel is my ultimate goal. Everything that I do outside of Israel in many ways is just to set an example for my children, that they should know this is what a Jewish man should do with his life. He should be dedicated not to his own self, but to the higher self, to the self that's beyond, to transcend your own independence, to live for something that's beyond you. That's the ultimate service of God.
Yeah, I want to take this a step further. Obviously, you're talking about your children and your family, but what are your dreams? What is, as you sit here on the couch or as you're sitting out on your front porch here, what are your dreams of this place or your family or the nation of Israel? Or like, what do you see in the future?
You know, right outside my house here, there's a dirt road that literally passes right underneath my balcony here. It's called the Route of the Patriarchs. And it dates back to the time of the patriarchs. And, you know, right in the middle of the book of Genesis, Abraham is called from Beersheba to take Isaac as a sacrifice to Jerusalem. And this was the major highway from south of Jerusalem to Jerusalem, where they walked right along this pathway here. And since then, for thousands of years, all of the Jews that lived south of Jerusalem, this was the highway that they walked on to arrive at the temple 3 times a year. And on the road, you'll see ancient ritual baths, ritual mikvahs that were built to purify themselves on their way up to Jerusalem. To see my children today playing on the Route of the Patriarchs, where Abraham and Isaac walked, is the dream. The dream is already here. Now we just have to make it flourish. We've returned to the mountains of Judea. How? It's mentioned over 40 times in the Bible. It's the most prophesied event in all of Scripture, the ingathering of the exiles. And here in just my community, we have Jews from Ethiopia, Russia, America, South America, all over Europe, South Africa, Australia. We've been ingathered from the 4 corners of the earth back to the mountains of Judea against all odds. So the dream now is to raise marvelous families, beautiful children that will fight for what's right in the world, that will fight for peace, that will fight for democracy, that will fight for people's rights, that will see the poor and reach out and help them. Meaning, why is tzedakah such an important mitzvah in the Torah? Why is giving charity so fundamental? Because if we are to be just for ourselves, then what's the difference between us and a horse? It's what makes us human that allows us to give of ourselves. So I would love for my children to live a life where they're living beyond themselves and living for the higher causes of life. That would be my dream.